Well, I'm Mary Dankiness, and I have lived in the house across the street from here at 4th and Fairmont since 1960. And so I have seen a lot of changes in the neighborhood, and I'm delighted to see everything that has been going on, in the past. But the reason I wanted to do this interview is because I wanted to pay tribute to the people who have come before the people who think that they discovered Northern Liberties, right? And I don't know if you're interested in why it's called Northern Liberties. William Penn established the center of town, and for every time somebody purchased a plot of land inside of Center City, they were giving a free plot of land to the north of the city. So the north is the Northern, and the free is the Liberties, so that's why they called this Northern Liberties. Oh, okay. But it extended way beyond, I think, almost up to Roxborough at one time, until we charted our boundaries from Front to 6th, from Girard to Spring Garden. The two in particular who established Northern Liberties Neighbors Association in 1975 are Claire Braun, and she still lives over on Fairmont Avenue, and Marie Ellis. And as a matter of fact, it was in Marie Ellis's house over on Fairmont Avenue in the 300 block where the charter of Northern Liberties Neighbors Association was formed.
Why did you guys initially start up in 75?
Because it was really important. In 1975, this area was just a disgrace. And we knew that people either were moving out or else we had to stay here and stabilize it. It was really considered the slums at that time. And people were afraid to move in. And many, many people were moving out. But my husband and I decided, we're going to stay and we're going to make this a better place to live. There was a lot of houses that were falling down, and as a matter of fact, so many of them were going to be demolished, and this is another thing that people nowadays don't realize, but we saved at least 50 houses in this neighborhood from being demolished. And I mean, they would just be like tooths in the middle of blocks if we hadn't stayed here and taken care of that.
How did you guys take care of them?
The Office of Housing and Community Development was the one that gave us the money for it. And they were the ones, I have to give them a lot of credit for coming in here. And not only did they save a lot of houses, but they were able to rehab houses and make them available for the low-income people in the neighborhood. And so that's what we were basically fighting for. And they installed sidewalks and planted trees and did a lot of things to make a lot of improvements. And in fact, if it weren't for our organization, those houses at 4th and Poplar, the Dolly Madison houses, would not have existed.
What was there before those houses went up?
Well, it was the Dolly Madison Ice Cream Company, and a lot of people from the neighborhood worked there. And then it remained a vacant lot for years and years. When we got this house from Bill's parents, we had to find out how much it was worth. And so he came in and he evaluated it at $3,000. When I was the executive director over at Northern Liberties, I made it my policy to make sure that the people who had been here for a long time had an opportunity to stay. And that's why we got a lot of these people, the city built their houses and rehabbed the houses and sold them to the low-income people. So at that time, they really had we kept a lot of the people here, a lot of the poor people that couldn't afford to move to the suburbs. But I think now several of them have already left too, which is unfortunate.
When did you start having a lot of the artists move in?
Well, that was interesting. We were glad to have the artists move in. They moved in from Old City when Old City became too expensive for them, so they came up here. And probably in the 1980s, and Larry Friedman was one of them, Frank Hyder, Ira Yupin.
Did they kind of change the dynamic of the neighborhood?
They did, yes, and some of them got on the board, to help revitalize the neighborhood. And we raised our 4 children here, and now they can't afford to live here, but so that's pretty ironic.
Roy E. Goodman, curator of printed materials, president of a group called the Friends of Franklin, an international group dedicated to promoting Franklin's ideas. Basically, I was renting an apartment on the other side of town. And I thought that the lease was up. It was a real big place. I had a couple roommates. One of my housemates worked up here, told me about the neighborhood, and he said you can get a good deal on a house. And he, in fact, bought a house for $5,000. Well, I wasn't quite as lucky, but I did get a good deal on this house. And I liked the neighborhood. It was quiet, good public transit. I could walk to work at 5th and Chestnut in 15 minutes. It was like a village. And that's what I liked about it a lot. It had a lot of character and characters. Our custodian at work had shown me something in a local paper about funding for people under a certain age to receive mortgages from money that Ben Franklin left. And for 200 years, this money was lent out to people living and working in the city under a certain age, under a certain income. And I got that. And I thought, well, I work at a place founded by Franklin. I was interested in Franklin. And here's a guy that left money because he believed that if his neighbor, he said this pretty much, if my neighbor's doing well, I'll do well. Now, since that time, a friend of mine who's a historian did a study on the Franklin money, how it was used, who received it, and all the fine points on that fund, which actually ceased in 1990. Franklin said, for 200 years, I'm going to lend the money, and it would accumulate, he thought, to about something like $20 million. Now, he knew people would go bankrupt, die, default, all that business, but nonetheless, he said it's worth whatever just to give back to the place that's given me so much. It wasn't until really, probably early 19th century that you even had a considerable sort of core of people living in this area. With the mills and whatever that came in the 19th century, you had this growth. There were, interestingly enough, people here in 1793 for the yellow fever epidemic, and I have an account of how many people died in the area, what streets they lived on, and that was very informative too, to see their races and their occupations and whatever. It was a very mixed bag of all kinds of people living here. That's what was of interest to me when I moved into the neighborhood. It's still of interest, although I guess we've sort of been gentrified.
And do you have a sense of what the population of the neighborhood would have been at that time?
Maybe, now in 1790s, maybe 3,000. Prior to the internet, you really had to spend a lot of time going to a lot of places to get anything, pretty much. I had access to some things. There was a historian of the city, Charlie Peterson, architectural historian, and he would always talk about the fort or the barracks. Now the barracks, you've probably heard of the barracks, they ran from where Willow Street is, which is in between Spring Garden and Calla Hill, up to Green Street. And it was quite a large structure, mid-1750s or so. And that was an important facility in Philadelphia. Of course, this was on the outskirts, so you need a lot of space to build something of that size. He would always give me bits and pieces about the neighborhood, or he would ask me, what do you know about this, or tell me about that? So I started doing some work, and I found bits and pieces as diverse as an early spa, and I have to laugh because we see spas and day spas and all kinds of luxury things happening around the area now, but there was something called Bath Town in the 1750s and 60s, and that was basically somewhere around Green and American Street. It was supposed to be set up as a, well, basically a leisurely spot for people in the area to come and relax. And they even had a lottery plan to raise funds for it, but some of the clergy were a little upset with the, how shall we say, the relaxed standards of that place, and that actually never came to, well, it was kind of phased out. So it was hard to find things about Bath Town, and I did find little bits and pieces. You could find things in the newspaper advertising breakfast and hot chocolate and coffee served at this spa. But remember, clean water was a rarity, and when you had this spring, people would come, not only here, but would seek out clean water everywhere. Water then, as is today the case, a great draw for all kinds of people in all kinds of activities. Remember, this was its own entity. It wasn't until 1854 that this was a part of the city.
Well, my grandfather, Trooper Ortlieb, came home from the Civil War, and he wanted to be a farmer, but he was an immigrant, and he did have some knowledge of the beer business, of brewing beer. So he found a place and he started brewing beer, and it was just like a brew pub today. He got married, and he would be the brewer and the bartender, and his wife would be the cook and the server. And his beer got to be rather popular, so he sold it to other saloons in the area, and it grew and grew. Finally, the point that became very successful and bought more and more property and began to expand. Well, all he wanted to do was be a farmer, so he bought a farm land in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, and he built a house up there. And in the meantime, he had 6 sons and a daughter, and he turned the brewery over to the 2 oldest sons. And then one by one, the remaining sons wanted to get off the farm and into the brewery. So then the sons carried on the brewery, and subsequently, out of 6 sons, there were only 2 grandsons, and there were three daughters. And traditionally, the male was the one that carried on the business. So my cousin Henry and I, after the uncles died, we carried on the business. And then tragically, my cousin Henry died, and I was left with the family, and I bought the entire family out, and I became the sole owner of the brewery. So the family was depending upon the brewery for dividends, and we were at a point then when we couldn't produce dividends anymore. So I made a deal with the family, and I bought the family out. And then I was lucky enough to be able to turn the brewery around, and we had several good years. But like most industries, it was only a matter of time before the big guys would swallow the small guys. Originally, it was down the street, which was called St. John Street, and then subsequently he moved to the bar around the corner. What's known as what the Ortlieb Jazz House. And of course, when he started out, if you ever been in there, it's a long bar, and there used to be duck pins there. There's 2 alleys of duck pins, and besides, that was part of the thing. You come in and drink some beer and eat some free bar lunch and play duck pins. The very corner down there is where the beer was actually brewed, where all the ingredients came together, and it was like a raw beer there then. And then from there, it went to fermenting cellars, where the yeast was added and began to ferment, and those were a group of cellars, and that one building was a fermenting cellar there. And after fermenting cellars, it was filtered, and then it was aged for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then it was then put into government tanks. And a government tank is where the government finally got their count on how much beer you made, and that's where you paid your tax. And then from there, it was transferred underneath a tunnel to the 2nd floor of this building, and that's where the two bottling lines and 1 canning line existed, and that's where the beer was packaged. Yeah, the beer we made had a local flavor. It probably had a little more full body than the national beers. You know, the national beers at those times were all a mild flavored beer, so that it would be acceptable everywhere. Ours had more character, more body, but that's the style of the beer, and maybe people didn't like it or did like it. That's one or the other. But I never came out with a light beer. That was just something I never thought would be successful.
Was the neighborhood still a lot of German immigrants at that time?
Probably so. You know, the Polish populated up in the Northeast, the Irish maybe in Southwest Philadelphia. And this was predominantly a German, God bless you, a German area.
Yeah.
Can you describe to me your impressions of the general neighborhood at that time?
You know, right here, there used to be an alley right next, well, probably where that was where we were building it, and there were 18 families living in homes that were probably 12 by 12, 2 floors. And so we wanted to buy them. They were owned by somebody. Pete Camille was the local politician. Pete said, "Joe, I can't do that. Those are, I have 18 voters and I have it lined up. I probably count 36 voters out of there." So we said, "Well, Pete, we really need it, and we'll work something out," and we did. But they were so those people were Ukrainian. That was those were, as the Germans would call them. They called them Yukis. You know, Yukis would come out and play soccer with the Germans. It's an international game. But then, as I said, we talked about when this building was built, and this was a high-tech place in 1948.
How so?
Well, it was brand new. We had all the latest equipment. You know, we had the same equipment as Budweiser had or anybody else had, the best stuff on the market we could buy.
Do you remember Dolly Madison?
Yes, I do. They had a thing going. Dolly Madison, remember that ice cream where you'd have a vanilla chocolate, strawberry in boxes? Well, every now and then they'd get miscuts, and they'd be on an angle or this or that. So during the summer, one of their guys would come over here to our platform, and they'd trade ice cream for beer. And of course, down the street they had Burke's livestock. You know, the cattle would come in, and they'd slaughter them, and then they took their skins up just down 2 blocks down where there's a huge tannery, and it really smelled terrible. That's where that park is now.
Right. I knew that they had the tannery at the park, but where was the livestock?
At Burke's was on the corner of 3rd and Girard.
Oh, it was clear up at Girard. Yeah. I don't say, would they just walk the cattle down?
No, they were they were dead.
Oh, they would kill them up there
Yeah.
and then bring down the hides.
They'd slaughter them there, and then they'd bring the skins up there for to finish the skins. Yeah, of course, the bakery was on the corner for a long, long time. That guy, he'd go to Florida in the winter, and that bakery would just keep on going. Sold a lot of bread.
Did that overpower the stench of the carcasses at all?
No, I think that stench was going probably in the late 40s, I think. No, his bakery smelled great.
I talk to old-time residents, and they tell me that all the time in the neighborhood you could smell the smell of beer and the smell of the bakery.
Yeah, probably so. Which we thought was two pretty good smells.
What do you think of the neighborhood now?
Well, I liked it better when I was here. But this is progress. This is the way things happen, you know.
Ira Yupin, and I live on American Street on the 700 block.
How long you been?
I've been here 32 years, since 1977.
What was the neighborhood like when you got here?
It was like empty. I remember using that word. A friend of mine who used to live here, moved to New York, and he had little kids. And when they came back from New York for like a visit, one of the kids said, "God, Daddy, it's so empty here," you know, because they were used to like already the, I think, Upper East Side, packed, you know, people everywhere. And here you'd come out, you could park a car perpendicular to the curb and leave it, and you wouldn't get a ticket even. It was like nobody was here. I think there were 2,000 people in what is considered Northern Liberties when I got here. Now we're, I think, up to 6,000 or something like that. Each decade we'd have like a surge. Oh yeah, Northern Liberties, hot neighborhood, you know, blah, blah, blah. 3 houses get renovated. Then there'd be some kind of crash, and it would stop and come back up again. And at one point we decided to do our own improvements because nobody else was doing it. So a couple of neighbors and my friend Charlie Abdo, we bought properties that wrap around the flower shop at 2nd and Fairmount. There were 5 buildings that were connected, and we split them up into the original shape, you know, 5 individual buildings, and we developed them into 10 apartments over the course of, I guess, two years. So that started getting things going on that corner. Then the owner of the corner property where the flower shop is, he had owned the place for 20 years and wasn't doing anything with it. Then he moved ahead and developed his building. And then across the street got developed, you know, where Grossman's Bar used to be, where CREI had their offices. That got worked on, the building next to it. So it slowly started moving its way around. Liberties was founded in about 80, I guess 1980. Mark Gerry owned it then, from Architectural Antiques. And he used a lot of his stuff to, you know, make it, because it was this hole-in-the-wall, you know, dump when he bought it. The bar, it was literally like a plank with 2 drums, you know, and that was the bar. And there was a blanket on a string hanging across the back to separate it from where the toilet was. And there was a bunch of just, you know, alcoholics basically in there, and they would stumble out into the street. I remember one time there was a fight broke out, and there was like a ring of people like around these 2 guys that were fighting. It turned out that one of the guys was a woman. She was this massive woman. She was killing the guy that she was fighting with. And they had traffic backed up 2nd Street like for 2 blocks. The buses, nobody could get by because they were all like making this, you know. So when Mark took that over and changed it, it was like, wow, it was a big deal. And then it became this kind of hot place to go to. You know, you'd see on occasion Spector, Arlen Spector used to come down when he was, I think he may have still been DA at the time. And, you know, Dr. J, because he used to have like some jazz going on there. So that was kind of the hip place in the neighborhood. That was it, though.
So you were around when Grossman's was here before
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Camacellos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was amazing. That was like, they used to have this trash man's special, because we had the incinerator site, and all the trash trucks would go there, dump their load, and then come back. And so there'd be these trash trucks lined up from basically from, you know, around American Street all the way down to Front Street on Fairmount, and they'd go to Grossman's, and Grossman's sold these like huge hot sausage sandwiches. And, I mean, I had one, and I was like, I had indigestion for a week. You know, you could see like these chunks of pepper just stuffed in this thing. It was enormous. And then they had a bar. I think, according to legend, it was the longest bar in the city. I think it was like 70 feet long. And I can't figure out how they did it. I think the floor must have been pitched, but they had a tall man's end and a short man's end. So it got like lower as you got down to the west end. There were so many odd characters in this neighborhood back in the day. It was like something out of Dickens. We had a woman who lived in a house by herself. I think her parents must have died, and she had like almost like a beard, you know, a lot of facial hair, and she was like a pyromaniac. And I remember a couple times she set fire to the house that she was living in, and they finally had to put her in a like some kind of a facility because she was a danger to herself and the neighbors. Then there was another guy, Mr. Kitchens, who used to walk around with a football helmet on and a shopping cart, and he also was a pyromaniac. And he burned, I know there was a big, beautiful building on 2nd Street that he torched. And he'd be grumbling and mumbling, you know, wheeling his cart around. And then we had Harry Scher, the Nail King, who owned most of the properties on the 700 block of 2nd Street. And he was a hardware guy, but he was the largest distributor of nails on the East Coast of the United States in the 40s. And he would be bringing in containers, you know, like ships full of nails and selling them off. You know, I think he had contracts with the military during the war and all this stuff. So he was still here when we got here, and all of his buildings were just complete shambles, and also full of junk. You'd walk into Harry's place, and you'd walk up a hill of stuff. Some of the places you could barely get the door open.
When was the point when you realized that they're not knocking down as many houses as they are building them up?
In the last 10 years. I mean, it's only been in this past decade that's been the case because the value just went so high. I mean, we bought buildings on 2nd Street in this late, I guess it was late 70s, early 80s, 79, 80, something like that, $6,000. Our friends, the Donovans I mentioned, that lived on Bodine Street, they bought their house for $1,500. So it was like, you know, the city was just like, it was so poor, and it was so like unappealing to most people, and then especially up here where it was like who the hell's living up there, you know? I think that's why eventually when the new building boom happened, we became such a hot place because we're so close to downtown, and we had so much open ground. I mean, you didn't even have to deal with demolition costs because most of it was open space anyway.
My parents, my mother, went to St. Augustine School along with all her brothers and sisters at 4th and Vine. And we all went there as well, my brothers and myself and all my cousins. So, you know, it's just a funny thing. But
I didn't realize there was an Italian population.
I know.
You always see the Eastern Europeans, the Slavs,
right.
and the Poles, and the Romanians.
Right, and there were a few Hispanic, there were a few black people, and they lived here for years, and everyone got along. You know, it was just a really nice mix of people. Everybody knew each other, and everybody really got along very well. I mean, there were all stores on 2nd Street. They were mostly Jewish.
What kind of stores?
Oh, there were dress shops, shoe stores. We had a little, they used to call it Sunray Drugs. A couple of dress shops, a children's store. There were fruit stores. Down here on Bodine and Green, there was a fish market. And the man's name was Mr. Sparky. And another story of my grandmother, she used to call him Pishayo. So one day he stopped my grandmother and he said, you know, he said, your children call me names. So she said, what do you mean they call you names? So he said, they call me Pishayo. So she said they're calling you Fishman. She said it's not a bad name. So then it was okay. He was all right with it. But he thought they were cursing him or something. Oh, well, Fairmount area, everybody knows about Harry and all his, he must have had 20 buildings. He would keep nails in one building and pipes in another building. But when you needed something, Harry was the guy to see, especially for the old houses because he had what you needed.
I imagine you're talking Harry Shore, is that his name?
Yeah.
I imagine he's passed away by now? Or is
oh, yeah.
The thing with Harry was, with these old houses, if you were doing anything and you needed a part, even if you didn't know what it was called, you went to him and asked for it and explained, just a minute, I got it.
They tore this lot where the new houses are here. Mm-hmm. Well, there was a paper company, that printing company there. And so they tore that down and there were bricks all over the place. So my boys had a wagon and the kids up the street, they were over there and they were picking bricks. All of a sudden this helicopter came hovering over the neighborhood. They all came running in the house. They were so afraid. They said, we didn't do anything, we were only picking bricks. But here there was a shooting on 5th Street and a policeman got shot. And the bullet hole is still in that man's window. He never fixed it or had it replaced or anything. And people, they were chasing people coming off the bridge or something, and they stopped there and they shot the policeman. So I mean, but it was a little funny that the kids thought that the police were coming after them for taking bricks. It was, I mean, when I was in my teens and younger, it was a nice place to grow. Then the neighborhood started to change, and then it wasn't so great. But you know,
what do you mean it wasn't so great? When was the not so great time?
Well, it went through a period where I think a lot of people were moving out, and then they didn't care who they were selling to, and it got a little strange. I mean, we had this house next door here It was beautiful. There were all hardwood floors, French doors. I mean, the house was really maintained. And as I said, it was a magistrate and his wife that lived there. Well, they both died, and the house was sold or rented. Well, the people, to clean the house, would get the hose, a garden hose, hook it up to the front, or they would have it, I guess, hooked up in the house, and hose the whole first floor down, and then sweep everything out the front door. And my mother would die. You know, she couldn't believe what they were doing to that house. So it went through a period where it wasn't the greatest place to live. But I mean, now I think it's great. I love it.
This was an industrial belt. It was factories, meat houses,
a little bit of everything.
Working people, working class people.
Yeah.
And people lived in the neighborhood and worked in the neighborhood?
Sure, worked in the neighborhood, lived in the neighborhood, raised their children in the neighborhood. People come back. You call it Northern Liberties. We call it good old Lawrence and Pop.
That was what they used to call it.
Although it was, ironically, it was called Northern Liberties.
Yeah.
It would stretch from Front Street to 8th Street, north side of Spring Garden Street to south side of Gerard Avenue.
All right.
Beyond that is East Poplar. It's the only thing the people that's moving in the neighborhood ain't from the neighborhood.
Right.
It should have been the people that were reared in the neighborhood that made the neighborhood. But the people that's moving in the neighborhood, they moving in with the attitude as though the people that really came from the neighborhood don't belong in the neighborhood.
Right.
When you come in the neighborhood, you should try to intermingle. And by intermingling, the people that's here, you let everybody work and everybody make a living. See, now they making it harder for the people that come here and that were born and raised here to move out because it's becoming expensive.
Too expensive. Go on.
You know, so in other words, that's that capitalistic form of the government. That's America. You asked me about 95. I think 95, when they put it, 95 in, it was very good as far as people getting around and traveling. But it was many lies told about that. A lot of people that owned houses had to move.
Because they want to put 95.
Because they said they was going to put 95, and 95 didn't even touch the area.
Do you remember that James Madison school that was over there, right where 95 is now, at Green and Newmarket?
Sure, I remember I remember James Madison school. It was a school for people with, supposedly for people with learning disabilities, which they call now. One of the principals of that school name was Miss Jensky. Very good principal. James Madison School was in Newmarket and Green, not 2nd and Green. You know, and it only stretched about not even a half a block. Stretched back, basically back to Hancock Street. Okay? Then you had the Paxton School over 6 in Buttonwood, which later became world-renowned as the Parkway Program.
Yeah, man.
That was the first part of the Parkway Program. It was called the Gamma Program. My baby sister graduated from that school. And on the corner down there where the apartment or the condos is down there, Lawson Poplar, used to be an American store.
What's an American store?
Well, it was like a A&P.
A&P store there.
And so what were the other stores on Poplar?
Well, they had laundries, private businesses.
So there was actually a grocery store in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a couple of them around here. There used to be one up on Poplar Street. That used to go to Eddie's to get a hoagie up to Eddie's. Straight up Poplar Street.
Yeah, that's Oriana Street.
Yeah, Oriana. Go up Oriana Poplar.
That was a Unity Frankfurt store.
Then
you had Ortler's Brewery down on 3rd Street. Then you had the Kaplan Bakery, which is still in existence.
Yeah, the bakery's still there.
Poplar. Then you had the Sunray store at 2nd and Poplar. Like I said, I've been in this neighborhood 63 years off and on.
Back then, if Natalie had to go out and, well, I don't know, if she wasn't really into meetings or stuff, but if she visited somebody, she would call me, no cell phone, she'd call me, and I would meet her. because there was no way you were going to let somebody, you know, who you loved walk home a block or two by themselves. It was just too weird around here. It was really scary. I catch people stealing, robbing, doing this, doing that all the time. You know, I would grab them, I'd do that, I mean, you know, and then it was just like, it was a mess. We got robbed in here twice in our house. We weren't home, but I mean, where people just came in and decided to take stuff. The first time they took everything, there was nothing left. I mean, they took my clothes. Every TV, radio, phone, answering machine. Just, it was horrible. It was just horrible. Natalie, I'm not sure I made a good decision. It was just like constant. And then somewhere around, and I was involved in the zoning, and I got on the board, and I was doing other stuff, and I really started really getting excited about being involved and just being, you know, trying to pull something off with the rest of the neighbors who were part of the same sort of, like, you know, let's put the wagons in a circle. We're all in this together, and then we started seeing some stuff happen, you know, and I mean, it was slow, and we were on zoning since '87. Sometimes we would check our phone, is it work? You know, hello, testing. You know, check to see if our door works. Nobody's coming, nobody's going on. And people will start coming in. We want to do a little apartment here. We want to do a little house here. We're thinking about doing 4 units here. Governor's Court was our first big project, which is right across the street from you at 4th and Brown. Governor's Court that goes west from 4th towards 5th, and you drive in on the side there, and there's a back units. That was our first thing where it was like, we had, you know, wow. You want to do something here in our neighborhood? Yeah, we want to put in like whatever, 14 units. Little by little, just, you know, like one thing at a time, and then we started creating I and this other guy started putting together some music festivals, and I still do the music festivals. I mean, we've done music festivals now forever. The Welcome America Parade that's when we started getting pretty good at what we were doing. Some people in the neighborhood said, let's do a park here. Bang, we had sort of like an open land park. That was Liberty Lands. It started that way. And there was a request for proposal from Sunoco Welcome America. Don and I and a couple other people, we said, how about if we do something? We wrote something up. They said, you're one of our 10 contestants. We had the greatest festival. It was on goes up to, we got the Friday, I think, because it's like 10 days up to July 4th, and we got like the Friday before. It was, you know, the great day. We had music. I got like 5 fantastic, all different kinds of bands. We had people, fire eaters. We had, it was sort of like the Northern Liberties, the first Northern Liberties variety show. We had people dancing with lights on. We had puppets, giant puppets and things. There was a parade that started. We have all the kids involved in it, and we had, Henry Ortley provided the beer, and we were all drunk by the end of the night, and then Action News showed up, and we literally, Don and I had escaped and walked to poor Henry's down American Street because the thing was done, the last band was on. Don said, psst. We went down, we were shooting up Jameson's. We came back, Don and I had our arms around each other. We were singing sea shanties. And Paula comes up to me and says, where you guys been? Action News is here. They want us to reform the parade for the 11 o'clock news. And we're like, Paula, we're drunk. We can't reform anything. We came back. We got everybody. Come on, lady, you with the thing, with the baton, the fire eaters, everybody. And there at Action News, go! And we did it, and we pulled it off, and we got voted best festival, and we got 50 seats at the Phillies game, and I got to throw out, I have pictures of the first ball. I noticed that around that time, my little apartment next door, that we would kind of like always had to rent it, but it wasn't easy. All of a sudden, one day I put an ad in the city paper, and I got 30 phone calls. And a lot of them were single women or women friends, like two gals. And then I started noticing single, you know, coming up from the Yale, single women. That was it for me. I said, when there's single women walking by themselves, it's like everything changes. And then Bart came in. And that was weird at first, and well, it's been weird ever since. But the end result is, you know, and nobody has nobody has spent more time or lost more time, I think, than me, and maybe Matt, because of Bart. But somebody had to come in and take over 15 acres of crap and do something with it. And we spent a lot of time reviewing 50 projects of his, and the end result, and people are really digging it. You know, people come in, their cars are a little bit better, they actually have real jobs and stuff like that, but then they go, but then they're not like, you know, we need to change things around here, there's a little bit too much, you know, whatever. They're forced, they're sucked into it, they're sucked into this, like, you know, like vortex that's happening here, and that's just the way it goes. It's stronger than it's and I don't know what it is. I really don't know, but I kind of like it. I like it. I mean, I can't walk 3 blocks without stopping 19 times and running into people. Of course, everybody asks me questions because it's like, what's going on with that, you know? And I'm like, Natalie, you remember that milk I was getting? Yeah, I'll be home like Thursday. But, you know, but that's better than 15 years ago when I'd have to get in my car to get milk. Or there was nobody to talk to. Or if anybody wanted to talk to me, they wanted to rob me, so they wanted to talk to... Yeah, so I'll take this any day of the week. And so that's what's good. That's what's great. It's the people, and then everything else falls into place.
Were you born in 34?
Yeah.
And so, do you remember what the neighborhood, I would assume, because you left before the highway was built.
I-95?
Yeah.
Well, no, my aunts had to move because they took their house on New Market Street.
They were asking me what people thought about it, but people didn't complain.
Well,
much.
no, there was very few businesses. There was a lot of homes, but most of the people in them days, you know, nobody owned their homes. I mean,
a lot of renters,
very
yeah.
few people owned homes. You know, and it was mostly all rentals, and you know, they came in, they offer you so much money, like they did to my 2 aunts. They offered them so much, and they had to get out. So they took it, and they bought a home here on 4th Street. What else could you do? You know, public domain. They come and they take it. They're going to take it anyway. You know, and there was in front of them, all on New Market Street was trucking outfits.
Yeah.
They used to come in and load and take off and load. It was warehouses. And then there, on the other corner, down in back of them, was stables. We used to hang in there, and you're watching them shoot the horses and everything. And he'd say, oh, well, I got 2 horses to go to the Inquirer building. So you had to walk them. You couldn't ride them. So from Second and Wood to the Inquirer building at Callahill, Broad and Callahill, right? Where you get the passport papers now. They got that car, train there, right? That's where that used to be the depot for the horses. So we would walk the horses. You got 50 cents to walk the horses. A quarter apiece. That was to
Just to walk the horses for exercise?
No, to take them back. He would shoe them. He would shoe the horses. Then we had to take them back to the stables.
Oh, I
At the Inquirer building, because they used to pull the bolts of paper before the electric. You see, they had electric cars, trucks. You don't remember them? They were great big flat electric trucks, and they used to take the big bolts of paper, and then the horses used to put this lighter stuff. And then when we would get tired of walking, we'd get past a couple blocks away from Andy's, we'd get up on a horse and we'd ride them. But you weren't allowed to ride them. Well, we would make a quarter.
Yeah.
My grandfather, Angelo, he died during the influenza after the First World War, 1918, 1919. And he used to, at the ferry, at Front and Borough Avenue and Market. He sold the chestnuts and peanuts.
He had like a little.
He had the roasted.
cart,
He had a
you know,
little
and
cart with the
sold-
roasted chestnuts
And fruit.
and peanuts. Yeah, that's what he and fruit. That's what he sold. And then he passed away. And here's the story, a true story. He passed away during the influenza, right? Now you couldn't bury anybody. Nobody would touch anybody. And we lived next door. Fox, his father lived next door to my grandmother, 229 Green Street. So he came in and took care of the body, but then you couldn't get into any cemetery. So my uncle Joe and my other uncle Freddie, who had the bar second race, they got, my uncle Jossie was a teamster. And he used to run, he was at 107 down on 2nd and...
They used to have the union...
At 107. Yeah, 107. Well, he was one of the founders of 107. They were teamsters because they drove the banana wagons. They would go to pick the bananas and deliver them to the depot. Here at 2nd and Fairmount, you know, the open house depot?
The head house.
Yeah, right. But anyway, they got his wagon. My two uncles, they put the coffin, my grandfather's body on there, went to Upper Darby, Holy Cross Cemetery, dug the grave, and buried my grandfather.
Wow.
I'm a big baby. When my grandmother died, they went to go bury her at Holy Cross. They got a deposit saying that this was from your family burying your grandfather. Ain't that something?
They had records of it.
They had records that they buried their own father. Now that is going back.
Now, when George asked you the first question about where you grew up here, you got all teary-eyed remembering growing up here. Why?
So many stories.
A lot of memories.
So many memories. My mother, my father, my grandmother, my aunts. We are the only ones left. It's sad when you go back, like you're saying, you go back all the, you know, try to go back in history, and I don't know, sometimes you want to forget it. But no, not really, you know. It's the only thing you got to go for, you know? The good old life.
La